Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. We thank GoFan and VNN, the exclusive sponsors of the UIAAA Connection. Now operating as one combined company, GoFan and VNN offer a seamless experience through digital ticketing and athletic websites. They make it easy to direct fans to one central place for schedules, communication, and tickets for both home and away events. We appreciate GoFan and VNN for their continued support and exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hunter. Today we have as our special guest James Edward, the prep editor at the Deseret News here in Salt Lake City. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Hey, excited to be here, neighbor.
Or I should just call you like high school guru. So let's have you begin by sharing with our international audience now, because it's not only in the U.S., there's international ADs that listen to this, where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
I am totally local here in Utah. I was born in Ogden, moved to Salt Lake when I was 5, grew up in Murray, went to Olympus High School, University of Utah. I have lived in Utah my whole life, so nowhere exciting outside of Utah I lived, but traveled a lot. And I knew I wanted to be a sports writer when I was a kid, like 10 years old. I just knew I love sports. I wanted to be a sports writer. So I just sort of followed the path to get here, which is you start working in a newspaper when you're a 18-year-old kid and you work there through college, and then I got lucky and got a full-time job, and I've been doing the same thing for 25 years, which is pretty wild to think about. High school sports covering for 25 years. So I've seen it all. Well, not all, but over the last 25 years. But when I started working, we were on the old type of newspaper systems that that like dot matrix type of stuff, which was just wild to think about how far it's come. So when I say I've seen it all, like I've seen how the newspapers were put together and the same way forever, and now hardly any newspapers print anymore. So it's been a
it's
fun
all
ride
digital.
to see the evolution of it all.
So talk to me about, what year actually did you graduate from Olympus?
So I graduated from Olympus in 1994.
Okay.
And then I went straight to the University of Utah and graduated up there in 98. And I worked for it's called the Daily Utah Chronicle at the University of Utah. That's the school newspaper there. I worked there all 4 years, that was my fraternity. I had great friends there, but you're doing newspaper hours when you're working at a student newspaper on college campus.
Right.
There was a daily newspaper. The deadline was midnight. This is how, we printed the stuff, and I drove it to the printing press. I was one of the people, like, once a week, you actually drove the printed stuff to the printing press. You had to drive under the freeway in this dark alley to get to where this big printing press was. But yeah, it was, so you're kind of a fraternity working late nights in a college newspaper.
That's fascinating. So tell me, since it's been years since I've been at the U, is the Chronicle still printed daily, or has it gone totally electronic?
I believe it's still printed I think they have a weekly edition. Obviously everything is online, and I'm sure they do, update stuff like that way, but I think they do a weekly printed edition, at least as a couple years ago. That's what it was.
So let's go back then, talk about your youth. So you participated in youth sports in the Olympus area, in the Holiday area, and then got the bug to be a sports writer. So you must have been fairly good at some of these sports.
I actually grew up in Murray. We didn't move to Holiday till my sophomore year, but yeah, I grew up in Murray, and my love was baseball. I love all sports. I love all sports. I love playing Nerf football outside with my friends, flag football, basketball in the driveway. Like, I love all sports, but baseball was the sport that I played and I I I guess moderately excelled, we'll say, as a youth. I was, made some all-star teams in Little League and Babe Ruth, but it didn't really, honestly didn't even try out for the Olympus high school team because we moved super late. My parents, it was weird. That's a long story. I don't want to bore you, but I always regret
Mm.
not trying out for the high school baseball team at Olympus. Part of me thinks, oh, sure, I would have made it. But then I watch these kids now as I'm doing all this and, covering it for 30 years. I'm like, I don't know that I was that good. But so anyway, but I
Yeah.
love baseball and the love is still there. And it's one of those things where I'm like, I love covering high school sports and I don't envision ever changing. But if we get a Major League Baseball team here in Utah, I might be calling my boss to say it might be time for a change. And
There you go.
that's
So
that's
leads
where
me
the
to
original love is.
that leads me to my next question, which is, what is your biggest failure or disappointment in life? So is it that you didn't try out for baseball, or is there something else you want to share with us?
I mean, that's a very minor disappointment. I mean, part of the thing,
Right.
yeah, they made it, but there was one, and I haven't talked about this in probably a long time, but when I was at the University of Utah, I was a young writer. I'd been doing this for a couple years, and I made a mistake in a column that I wrote that was very naive and insensitive
Hmm.
to a race of people. We'll just call it that. It seemed like it, and from where I was, it was in good fun. It was all related to sports.
Okay.
It's kind of current in a way where we have, we just watched the Canadian um, U.S. gold medal hockey game. And we
Right.
have these regional rivalries in sports, soccer with Mexico, hockey with Canada. And so I wrote a column that tied into that, and it was all supposed to be this fun, hey, we should be dominating because hey, look at our population. But I used a few words that were taken, well, the people interpret them the way they interpreted them, and that was my
Right.
fault to not be more aware of that. And so I'll say that I was 21, 20 years old at the time. So here we are 30 years later, and it's something that it stayed with me forever. Like I am very careful if there's ever a situation where you just take a step back and think, okay, this is what I mean, but how could someone else interpret it? But that was a big
Sure.
deal. I mean, I was a public enemy number one on the campus of the University of Utah for about a week. I shouldn't say the whole campus, but so anyway, it was one of those I deeply regret it. But sometimes when you're young, you learn things and you grow from them. So that was probably the one. It was hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. Let's have you talk to our audience about some of the mentors and the leaders that you've had in your life that have made a difference to you.
Oh, you know, anyone from Utah listening to this might know the name Lee Benson. He's been a
Hmm.
Deseret News columnist for 50 years.
Lee
He's the
Benson, Jordan High graduate, by the
Oh,
way.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
He is the reason I am a sports writer because his son Eric and I went to the same elementary school in Murray for 3 years and we were best friends. He was a Oakland Raiders, Los Angeles Raiders. I can't remember what they were at the time, but he was a huge Raiders fan.
Right.
I was a Broncos fan, and I found out that Eric got to go to the Super Bowl with his dad every year because he was a sports writer. And I love
Well,
the NFL, and I'm like, you know what? I want to do that. I love sports, so I want to be a sports writer. So I say Lee Benson was sort of the inspiration of it all, but my high
hmm.
school journalism teacher, Mr. Felt, if anyone locally has ever been to an Olympus High School game, he was the announcer there for 30 years, coined the phrase Titan Triple. But he was just great. He was a great high school teacher. Miss C was, I actually excelled in graphic arts probably more than I did journalism in high school. And I actually, did you know this, Hutch? I was a Sterling Scholar, if you can believe that.
That's
This little
awesome.
sports writer was a Sterling Scholar, but it wasn't for journalism or sports. It was for graphic arts. And Miss C, she was great. I think Miss C she instilled in me confidence that when you're going to a new school as a high school kid, like,
Hmm.
it's tough. It can be very tough, but she instilled this confidence in me that I think it really resonated when I got up at the University of Utah, believing that I could do stuff. And then once you get up to the U, I mean, I don't know. My college experience, it, it was all about the student newspaper. I went to class, I did classes, but it was that fraternity. So some
Right.
of my biggest influencers were like just the writers that were 2 years older than me. Robert Gerke, he's a columnist at the Salt Lake Tribune. Ty
Hmm.
Bronisil was my sports editor. Just people like that that they had gone through that over the previous 2 years, and they just kind of teach you the ropes of how to do this thing called sports writing. Like, I remember covering my first jazz game when I was 19 years old, because we covered jazz games at the Cronny. We just drove down the street,
Sure.
went in, covered the game, and here I am, this 19-year-old kid walking into the locker room, and I looked like I was 5 years younger than I actually was. So I'm sure people thought I was a 14-year-old kid with a press pass walking into these locker rooms. But you just sort of, a lot of it is just, the your peers, some of them even with your rival companies. Those are a lot of the people that sort of inspire you through the years.
Well, so you're a 19-year-old kid and you're in the locker room with Stockton and Malone
Yeah, totally.
and later Hornacek.
Yeah, and here's an even funny story. There was, it might have been 2001. I think the Dream Team or something played an exhibition game, Team
Hmm.
USA at the Delta Center, and it was during the summer, and I had a pass, and I was going to cover it and do some stories, and I specifically remember asking Shaq a question, and he turned to me and he says, "How old are you?"
Yeah.
Oh,
And
it
so
was
there,
great. And I told him my age, and we had a little joke, but.
yeah. My question to you is, so I'm having never met Shaq. Is he bigger in person than he looks on TV?
Well, he was sitting down, but even then, I was looking eye to eye with him, or he was maybe even taller than me. But it was just super funny. I mean, here you are as a kid who loves sports your whole life, and you know, you gradually learn when you pursue this profession of neutrality and impartial.
Hmm.
You don't cheer, but for a kid who grew up loving sports and the NBA, especially because I was our local pro team, it was pretty surreal to go to a game one day and you're like you do not cheer. You here to watch, cover it, take notes, and write a story. And it's like it was a pretty interesting um, indoctrination, I'll say, to that part of the business.
That's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Let's have you now go into more detail about the 19-year-old working at the Utah Chronicle, and now you're the prep editor at the Deseret News. I realize it's 30 or more years later, but go into a little bit more detail about how that happens.
Oh, I mean, I was a scoreboarder. That's what they call you'll remember the old newspapers when you open up the page and there was the page of the box scores and the standings
Right?
and stats. I mean, it was the scoreboarder each night that put that together. And that's what I did for 4 years in conjunction with working, going to school at the University of Utah, full-time student, working at the student newspaper. But you really get exposed to just deadlines and newspapers and what the business was like. Like the deadlines fluctuated, it seems, through the years, but I remember that, it was a midnight deadline was what it was for a really long time, or 11:30. So
Hmm.
you can imagine, like, this audience here, a high school football night. I mean, imagine the state you're in. Imagine how many high school football games there are on a given night. Here in Utah, we're up to about 58 a night.
Right.
And our goal then, just as it is now, was to have the box score of every single game. And back then, we didn't have email, we didn't have compute. Well, we had computers, but I mean, it was not like just send a quick box score. It was phone calls, and we would answer the phone calls on Friday night, and even basketball nights on Tuesday or Wednesday nights, and you'd answer the phone call, and this person on the other end would literally just be spelling the names of these kids, and you'd be typing them in, but it was a pretty well-oiled machine, as well as it could be when you're dependent upon receiving phone calls from 50 people. But there's an excitement associated with that I still think I get anytime I go to a high school football game. It's that same, I didn't play high school football, but I guess I connect with it on that excitement level of my experience with it and how that
Yeah.
energy buzz and when a score comes in and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that team beat that team in double overtime. And that sort of that excitement carries you from year to year and then realizing, yeah, I actually want to do this. This is something that I can see myself doing. Plus, I loved covering the games and writing the stories. So when I graduated from the University of Utah, there wasn't an immediate full-time position. I did spend like 6 months or 9 months at the Davis County Clipper up there for about nine
Okay.
months, working part-time at the Deseret News, but doing a little community newspaper. And then an opportunity, they kind of, I was lucky that they sort of created something for me. I guess I was called a super scoreboarder for a couple years there
Mm-hmm.
as a full timer, and they gradually just started giving me, more assignments covered, indoor soccer, minor league hockey, you name it, all the small things that, they need someone to cover and you just do. And I was promoted to the high school sports editor in 2003. So I had been there for like 8 years, part-time and full-time, but that's when I became the official high school sports editor. And what's funny about that is the three previous sports editors before me each did a 3-year stint. There was Dirk Facer, there was
Mm-hmm.
Jody Gennessy, and then there was
Yeah.
Jimmy Hinton. They all did 3 years. And now this is my 23rd year. So I thought I'd be doing it 3 years and move on to the next thing. And there was a part of me that was like, Alice, I want to move on to the next thing. But I'm glad it didn't happen because I love high school sports. I mean, I just think there's so we could talk for hours and hours about it. Could go sport by sport,
Sure.
why I love it. But it's just I don't know, it means so much to the kids and it still seems to there's passion. Pro sports and college sports, they evolve and change, and there's parts that I like and don't like, but high school is still kind of in many ways, the same kids out there playing the same sport. Sure, some of the other stuff, the AAU and the clubs and parents
Right.
maybe a bit more, but I think when it comes right down to it, 32-minute basketball game, I think that's kind of the same thing as it was when I was in high school. So that's
That's
kind of the
perfect.
path that you took from the scoreboard into current.
Let me ask you this then. So I want you to pick two or three of what you think maybe your best stories have been over the past 20 years. Talk about them for a minute and just reflect about them and why you think they're their best stories.
Oh, there was one actually, like, where do we go? I covered Real Salt Lake for like 15 years, which at the same time as covering high school sports, which, presented some feeling stretched thin challenges. And I know this isn't
Hmm.
uh, it's not a high school story, but I think it's relevant to kind of your contacts and your sources and just building that trust. I think even, in high school, I think a lot of the people that I cover, I hope they trust me. I hope that when we talk, they feel like they can tell me something and know that it's not going to be leaked or whatever. But there was
Right.
one, it was actually Jason Christ. He was a former coach at Real Salt Lake, and I'd covered the
Right.
team for several years, and he was the coach. And he one day they wanted to. He knew he was going to get fined. Let's put it that way. He knew that he calling me was going to get him fined by the league and get him suspended. But even still, he called me because he wanted to express his frustration about, obviously refereeing and things like that. But
Right.
it was more of he trusted me to tell his story in a way that he couldn't tell. And that was something that, as far as stories go, it wasn't a great story. It was, just a standard story, but it was the back end of years and years of sort of building those relationships and that trust that I think really mattered there. I think, you know, one a connection with you. I mean, Jackson Dart, when we did his Mr. Football story at Corner Canyon
Right.
in 2000, I'd covered him for 3 years, a little bit at Roy, at Corner Canyon, and you just sort of you build that trust with these people that when you ask them questions, they can really open up. it felt like that was one that stands out to me because he went on to, great things and who knows the career he's going to have. But writing that sort of, I guess we call them those all-state stories that we write, like a Mr. Football or a Mr. Baseball or Miss Basketball. Those are sort of like the wrap up. We're wrapping up your career up until now story before you go on to college and great things. And those stories are really fun because the kids don't have to worry about bulletin board material. They can just sort of open up
Yeah.
about the journey that they've been on. And that was really one that Jackson, his path from Roy High School to Corner Canyon, but he was just open. He was really opened up about, the path and the journey. And so I get to write like six. Oh, I was about to do a six or seven thing there to connect with the youth. But I do write about six or seven of those Mr. Miss stories a year, and they really are probably the most when I actually write the most fun stories I have because they're profile pieces. They can be, 1,500 to 2,000 words. Where if you cover a game
Hmm.
on a Friday night, a basketball game, it's about 600 words. 600 words, send, post. But those you really go in, triple the length and you talk to these kids and the coaches and they're just fun. They're really fun to see the kids open up. And that's, a big part of why I do this. So why I don't write as much as I would like, partly because of our website, Deseret.com, and the database that it is and just the work that it goes into, making sure that website is populated with all the data. But when I do write, those are ones that I really like. Like, I'm gonna be writing a Ms. Basketball story and a Mr. Basketball story here in a couple weeks. I don't know who they are yet, but those are ones that I'm looking forward to because you really just get to, sit down and talk with a kid in a relaxed environment.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. Let me ask you this. It's a two-pronged question. When you first started at the Deseret News, it was an afternoon newspaper.
Mm,
And
that's
so
right.
it's two transitions for the D News. One, it went from an afternoon to a morning paper, then competed with the Tribune, and it's been what, 3 or 4 years that it went from print now to the digital. So talk about those two different milestones at the newspaper.
Yeah. Boy, yeah, we were afternoon Monday through Friday, but we were morning on the weekend.
On the
So
weekends, right?
so you kind of got a little bit exposed to both of those in building the newspaper. I think, God, I'm trying to remember. I believe the Olympics was when we temporarily switched for the Olympics because you couldn't have an afternoon newspaper with the Olympics in town. It
Right.
just wasn't practical, especially if we wanted to be taken seriously and have, international and national people actually pick up our newspaper. So we switched for the Olympics, and I think we probably did it for 2 weeks before that and 2 weeks after. I don't remember the exact because then we reverted back to an afternoon newspaper after that for several years. But when we did revert to morning, it was actually, I think we'd been longing for it because I think sports was the one that was the hardest with an afternoon
Sure.
newspaper.
Because it's so far,
So far
it's like
after,
24 hours later, just about by
yeah.
the time you get the paper.
So it was it was great. It was an easy transition because we did it on the weekends and the weekends were always busier than the weekdays. So it was actually that transition it was a welcome transition because you felt like it be could be taken a little bit more seriously that way in sort of the media landscape locally. The transition to digital, that COVID really pushed it. I mean that was the pushed it over the top and made it okay.
Right.
No one's in the office anymore. We're getting rid of the daily newspaper. We're just going to go weekly. But it really didn't have that big of an impact on the high school sports side of things because we had been focused online on our website for a decade before that. I mean, in fact,
Right.
we launched our high school website in 2001, where we started archiving data. And that first website was, as clunky as they get. But people that ever go on Deseret.com and they always ask, why does your data always go back to 2001 and stop? And I say, well, that's when we actually started archiving data, which is probably, I want to say, I would bet that it goes back almost as far as any newspaper in the country. Like we were at the very forefront of that sort of evolution of don't just put the box score in the newspaper, put the box score online and create a database. And
Hmm.
that, I mean, honestly, that's the bread and butter of what our high school sports is. It's why I have a job still. I mean, it's why we are relevant still. It's that data, but it goes back 20, God, almost 24 years of having that data. And when you start thinking about 24 years ago, those kids, they've got kids who are high school kids now. And so you've kind
Exactly.
of got multiple layers of that. And we add on and add on. But so switching over to the digital side it really wasn't that big of a deal for us because I feel like we had already been doing it way before anyone else. I shouldn't say anyone else. The other departments, sports in general was one just based on the timing of it all with, deadlines. If
Yeah.
a lot of the government stuff, a lot of stuff's during the day, and there's more time to write the stories and get feature stories out. But with, the sports industry, everything happens at night for the most part, and the newspaper needs to go to print at night. So you're just always in that deadline aspect has always been there with our industry. So yeah, switching over was no big deal and great, and it was a welcome change all the way across the
Okay.
board.
Let me ask you this. What's one common myth about being a beat writer that you'd like to debunk to the general public?
Oh. Uh, that's a good question. I was thinking about that a little bit. I think that being the high school editor is not like being a beat writer of like if you're the Utah Jazz beat writer. I mean, they have one
Right.
team, one season, one sport. Um, so my experience first with Real Salt Lake when you're actually on one beat, one team it is it is a grind, and the players oftentimes do not like you because you have to ask the hard questions and no, we're not going out to lunch afterward, and no, we're not best friends. That's just the nature. But being the beat writer is almost like you're kind of the villain. In a way, you kind of become the villain because you have to, if you're a good beat writer, you have to ask those hard questions. So, like right now,
Yeah.
God, just imagine trying to cover the Jazz. It's been going on, the same tanking for 4 years. And while I get the long-term
Yeah.
part of it, being the daily beat writer of that is hard. I think it's harder than it's. I th When I say hard, I think it's mentally harder than people realize,
Okay.
especially if you're dealing with a athlete or coach who is maybe sensitive or quickly defensive, because you can't just ask a normal question because they're going to read between the lines and feel like you're attacking them. And so being a beat writer is hard in that way because you just are. You have to ask the questions. You have to write the hard things, but there's going to be backlash. But then you have to ask that same person a question the very next game. So you can't just burn a bridge. So it's a tightrope. Being a beat writer is definitely a tightrope with any sport. Imagine how hard it is when things are going bad and you have to ask that question But you just have
Yeah.
to do it. And if they don't like you
Yeah.
for a while, they can get over it. It's okay, but it needs to be asked. And the problem is with less and less trained journalists out there, just because of the way the media landscape is. I mean, most
Right.
newspapers a shell of the staff they were. Even we are. I mean, we're down, 25% of the staff we were when I started. A lot of not trained, but you still need to ask those questions, I think. And we're just talking about sports. Now you get into politics. Oh, geez.
Absolutely. What's the favorite part of your job, James?
The championship days, without question. Uh, I just saw you up at the University of Utah for the high school basketball championship games, and I was commenting to someone there. It's like these are the days. These are the best days because the kids, I mean, my kids are I have a junior and a sophomore in high school and a seventh grader. And my older two, they play esports and they're pretty good at esports. And my seventh grader likes soccer. He's not gonna, go on to probably won't make a high school team, but I've seen him play soccer since he was 5 years old, and now he's a seventh grader. And
Yeah.
now I just imagine go from seventh grade to 5 more years when they're a senior, and you will have seen a lifetime of work to get to a point where then on those state championship days, they reach their goal and you get to watch it, you get to interview them, you get to document that, and you get to write this story that hopefully captures the excitement that they feel in that moment of a lifetime of hard work. And there's also you see also the lifetime of hard work that ends in disappointment, paralleling it side by side. And it's just a special thing. And there's I don't know, 115 of them state championships that the
Right.
UHSA hands out between all the sports. I mean, there's euphoria more in some sports than other, but at golf this year, I remember the 5A golf championship. There were two teams that were basically tied going into the last hole. One kid missed a putt, another kid made a putt. It was the difference between winning and losing, and just sort of seeing that excitement. You know, we don't get last minute field goals in football games to win state championships that often or last minute baskets, but when they happen, it makes them all the more special. But just the
Yeah.
witnessing that and being in a position to kind of immerse yourself in it, you're not the story, but you get to tell the story. That's pretty fun.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you now a little bit of a selfish question that I didn't send to you ahead of time.
It's okay.
And
Put me on the spot.
well, it has to do with right because um, obviously you're a journalist and you went to the university, you graduated in journalism. And so I guess my question to you is how does that, I'm asking this for myself because as you know, I've written two or three novels. I'm working on my fourth, and I'm not trained as a writer in any stretch of the imagination. But I assume that writing fiction is a little bit different than writing for a newspaper. So I guess my question is, what advice do you have for fledgling writers such as myself or other people that maybe want to get published or write not because it's their job, but they write for different reasons. So talk
Yeah.
about that for a minute.
Well, give yourself a little credit here, Hutch. You've written 3 books. You're a published author, which is 3 more books than I've written. So
Well, there you go.
I think you probably give yourself a little more credit. But I will say, for me, especially with newspaper writing, and I think it would probably translate over to most writing, and they teach you this in high school journalism, college journalism, but it's all about your lead. And the more I
Hmm.
write, the more it really is about the lead. Probably some of the best stories I've written, I think it was because I I got the lead right. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to write a lead, but you want it to be compelling to the readers to keep reading. And I mean, especially now with the way they can track data on our website. I mean, they can tell us how far down people scroll on our stories. And
Mm.
say, oh yeah, they scrolled, you know, 20% of your story. So then you start thinking, how many people ever read the last part of my story? It's almost insignificant in a way how many people read it. It's still important and people do get down that far, but it is all about your lead, your introduction. And I see so many people when I read stories, it's generic.
Mm.
And it's okay, I was at that game. Yeah, you're right. That's what happened, but you didn't interest me to keep reading. And so
Sure.
I guess, and I think we have more of this luxury with web only now, because when it was print, you had a word count. and your editor was expecting you to write a 450-word story. Anything more than that, they were just going to cut, so there's no reason to write longer. But now when everything is just digital and you have more of that luxury, finding that introduction, whether it's the first few paragraphs of a chapter of your first book or
Mhm.
your fourth chapter in that book, something that makes the person want to read the next paragraph and the next paragraph, and you're just telling a story. Even the I don't know if you watched it or anyone on this podcast watched it, but the girls basketball 5A semifinal at the University of Utah this past week, we had West versus Bountiful. It was the
Right.
best game of the day. It was the first game. It was the best game. And you had two of the best players in the state playing. And it was great from the opening tip. It was a great game. And I could have just written something super generic. But I'm like, I need to find a way to capture that this was a great game for all these reasons. So I tried to just sort of tell a narrative a little bit of why this game was good instead of just facts. So I guess that's what I would say. Find the thing that's going to keep people wanting to read the next paragraph. Make it interesting. It's okay if you spend half of your, well, I shouldn't say half, but if I cover a basketball game on a Friday night, I can write my story in about 40 minutes, 35 if I need to. But it's not that long. And sometimes I spend 15 minutes on the first couple paragraphs because they're the ones that people read
Sure.
most. Some don't read beyond that. And then the rest of it is just kind of, you're putting coaches' quotes in, you're talking about the stats and the facts, but people aren't going to read that if you haven't given them a reason to read that. So there's
Right.
my
Well,
long-winded answer. Make it interesting.
great. That is a well, well, and
And with
I'm
AI,
I
everything can be interesting now.
well, I'm interested. I'm on my fourth book now, and I've obviously written about things that I know and things that I've experienced, but not being trained, I have to go back when I edit when you use like the same word three times in two sentences. You have to change how you write it, or you have
Yeah.
to change the word so it doesn't. I mean, stuff like that, that of course I never paid attention in high school in the first place in English class. So but that is some
Editing is
great
half the
advice.
battle. Editing is half the battle.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Let's finish up with a couple of questions now, James. The first one being this: from your perspective now as a sports writer, and a lot of the ADs in the schools around the state, if you had two suggestions for a brand new AD just starting out in a Utah high school, and they had to follow James' suggestion in order to be successful, what would your two suggestions be from
Oh man,
your point of view
from my point.
outside? Well, because you're a journalist now, you're not. When I always ask this of because most of my guests are ADs on the show, and so they have a little more input because that's their profession. But I'm interested in your input from someone who's in the profession but outside the profession, what you
Yeah.
would suggest to a new AD.
And I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think that for me, with our high school sports coverage is at its best on a day-to-day basis when we have cooperation from coaches or from athletic directors. And I know that at times we ask, I don't think we ask for a lot, but I'm sure that when I send an email to coaches asking them for a roster or a certain thing, I bet
Hmm.
it is inconvenient for them because they are either paraprofessionals with full-time jobs, they're teachers with the full, load of classes, and I 100% get all of that. I guess what I would tell an AD is the Deseret News is trying to promote your kids' accomplishments. That is my number one job as the high school sports editor. Our job is to highlight the great things that your student athletes are doing. So the more helpful you are to us, the better we can do that for your kids. I know it's inconvenient, but if your, you know, swimmer breaks a state record, I think they deserve to be recognized and highlighted for that. They've worked hard
Sure.
for that. We're in this anyone listening to this, we are in the high school sports business. It is, it's an education, but it's also it's a business, and we all have different roles within that business. And my role is to promote the great things that all these kids are doing. So if I was a new AD and I'm hiring a coach and I'm talking to the coach about, this and this, things they need to do. I can't speak to anything about field time and practice schedules and making sure people's grades are. I've never experienced that. But I will say is if you're an athletic director, tell that new coach if the media sends you an email, you should respond because probably 99.9% what they're asking is a positive thing to promote the kids on your team who, coaches love their kids. You build connections with these kids. It's from year to year, and we're just trying to highlight the great things they do. So I guess I would say don't ignore the emails from the Deseret News because we're just trying to promote the kids.
Perfect. Well said. We'll
But I
finish
know
with
it's
this.
annoying. I know it's annoying,
Yeah.
but that's okay. It's okay.
James, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Well, we should be talking about Weber State football. That's what we should be talking about.
Well, that's true enough, but that would be selfish of me to go down that road.
You know, I don't know. I feel like we covered it. I will say that uh, the I would say 50% of my job, maybe more, is a high school editor. And I don't know how it is with other people in my roles at different newspapers across the country. I imagine it's somewhat similar, but I'm in the data industry. That's basically what I am. Our website is probably 50% of what my job is, but I think that it's what separates us from everybody else. And I know Max Preps is a big part of the high school landscape now, and they do great things. But I think what we do is we are local, and I think that
Hmm.
local matters, I think, in high school sports. In the state of Utah, I mean, we have the Herald Journal in Logan. I mean, they do an amazing job covering the local teams up there. And the Ogden Standard Examiner, they cover their teams. And I know out in Vernal, they have papers covering their team. And down in Blanding, I mean, there are there are local papers all over the state that are covering high school sports. And I think that boots on the ground with high school sports matters. I think it matters a lot because we see these kids, we talk to these coaches. And I shouldn't say it matters like this high school sports publications is a big deal, but it's a big deal to these kids. And I think that feel like we're in that landscape. We're part of that, their excitement, their senior year of their high school football, whatever. I feel like we are part of that in a small way, their process. And I guess I'm proud of that. I'm proud of our website, what it provides, and we cover every championship game. Whether I'm there in person or our staff, I mean, there is a Deseret News writer pretty much watching kids lift the trophy at every single high school championship. And I think that's great. And I love it. So keep reading,
Perfect.
keep going to our website.
Couldn't have said it better myself on that note. That wraps up this edition of the UI AAA Connection. Again, our special guest today has been James Edward, the prep editor at the Deseret News. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, my friend.
Hey, it was great. Good to talk to you, Hutch.
Okay, for our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UI AAA Connection.